Thinking Out Loud with Dave Palmer. Here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
Welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm your host, Keith Downey. And how do we improve our minds, according to St. Thomas Aquinas? It's a great question. I'm looking forward to it. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Keith. Yeah, I figured that would be a more titillating subject line than let's talk about the intellectual virtues, which is basically what we're going to do. So a little bit of a trick question there, because who doesn't want to improve their mind? I mean, seriously, right? I mean, we're all interested in that, but if you want to follow St. Thomas Aquinas' lead, that would be tied into the intellectual virtues. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I have a feeling, Keith, that as we continue in this segment, we're going to see increasing growth in listeners and viewers, not so much because of this segment, because of what's going to happen at 15 minutes after the next hour. So I am excited about that. But this is kind of the warm-up act for that, okay? Yeah, when it comes to improving our minds, I guess you could say that universally we all want to be good, right? We want to be good, and God is goodness itself, and so we want to be like unto God. And so when we talk about improving our minds, the mind is the higher part of the soul. You know, you have the sensitive part of the soul and the passions and the appetites and that kind of thing. The mind would just refer to the intellect and the will. Right. So if you think of an angel is a mind. An angel is a mind without a body. And so that kind of shows you how you can talk about what part of the human person, what faculty we're talking about here. And so if you want to have a better mind, you have to have better habits. And habits are virtues, and good habits are virtues are habits, and so we talk about the intellectual virtues as being good habits of the intellect, right? So Thomas Aquinas, and the reason also why these are important is it's that the mind is what separates us from the brute creatures, all right? So your dog or your goldfish or your pet tortoise doesn't have a mind in the sense of intellect and will. And it's also what guarantees us immortality, because St. Thomas Aquinas says the mind is subsistent, which means it can exist on its own. You know, if we go and see a corpse, well, we trust that corpse is just a separated. It's a lifeless body, but the mind, the soul has separated, and so that's a very important part, because that gives us hope that there is everlasting life. So it's very important to focus on the mind. So St. Thomas Aquinas highlights 5 intellectual virtues, and so if you want to improve your mind, if you want to be more good from an intellectual standpoint, the 5 are divided up into what he calls the speculative aspect of our mind, or the contemplation of truth. So the first key to intellectual virtues is we want to contemplate truth, and there's 3 ways we can do that. The first one is through understanding. All right, so we kind of know that we can know something, and then we can also understand it. And understand it almost brings it to a higher level. And by the way, these are all acquired virtues, which means that we can work to improve them, as opposed to like an infused virtue, which is just a gift from God. Although God can infuse any virtues, so he could infuse these if he wanted to, but generally these would be called acquired virtues. So understanding is first principles. It was kind of interesting leading up to this segment. I was listening to Debbie and Adam a moment ago, and Debbie was talking about, watching these movies with her husband and waiting for how long until they take the Lord's name in vain. And she said, I don't understand this. I don't understand. And so we're all seeking understanding, and understanding in an intellectual virtue standpoint means the first principles, the basic truths of our faith, and in a deep understanding of it. So that's the first intellectual virtue. And the second one is one people are familiar with, and it's wisdom. Okay, so you probably know people who are wise. And generally, wise people seem to have a very ordered life, and they don't have big swings of emotion. And when some kind of travail or tragedy confronts them, they seem to deal with it with a certain sense of equanimity, and they just don't get all worked up over things, right? So wisdom is the highest of the intellectual virtues, and it judges all things and sets them in order. Okay, so a wise person sees the things almost through the lens of God. They see things as God would see them, and and also the big picture. You see things through the sense of this world is passing away, and so there's nothing really in this world that we need to get too worked up about. And then the third speculative intellectual virtue is science, interestingly enough. All right, so science presupposes understanding. So there's probably a lot of people out there listening right now that are scientists of one way or the other, and a good scientist would have understanding of principles, would understand things related to our faith, understand truth, and then apply that to their science. All right, so that's why when we talk about something like cloning or working with embryos or things that just give us that ickiness, it's because science is being used in a way that is not virtuous. It's not in line with the intellectual virtues. It's not in line with proper understanding. So these all kind of tie together. So those are the first three, and those all have to do with the contemplation of truth. And then the next ones are what are called operative virtues, which they had to do with our operations. So I'll kind of pause there and take a sip of coffee. And any thoughts on that, Keith?
Yeah, I mean, just a simple thought, really. This isn't very flashy things at all, but this is a very timeless, methodology from St. Thomas Aquinas, that it's kind of a nice little refresher, because I know many people aren't typically reading the Summa on a day-to-day basis, so this is great.
Yeah, that's true. Although they should, or
Yes.
it'd be nice to kind of, if they want to, they can pick it up and check it out. But yeah, the principles are also found, in the Catechism, and there's a lot of other places where you can learn about the virtues. Aquinas isn't the only place, but I think we all need to key in on the virtues and try to live a virtuous life, so then we can be more like unto God. So, all right, so those are the first three intellectual virtues, and those are all contemplation of truth, the speculative intellect. The last two have to do with operations. They have to do with things that we do or things that we make. And interestingly, one of the intellectual virtues is art. Okay, so this is right reason about things to be made. And so art should be a reflection of truth. Art should be a reflection of God. And we've all had the experience of seeing art that's like, I don't think that's very good. Or some art leads us into a higher contemplation of God and of truth. You walk into a church sometimes and you see some of the artwork, or you see statues, and it just raises your mind. So that's the purpose of an art. And that artist was, exercising intellectual virtue of art in a proper way. And then the fifth one, the last one, is one that I think everybody's familiar with, and that is prudence. And so prudence is an intellectual virtue. It's also the highest of the cardinal virtues, the four cardinal virtues, and it's right reason about things to be done. All right. So it's interesting because when you have a decision to make that, let's just say, somebody brings donuts to the office today and they put them in the kitchen. I always like to use the example of donuts because that takes temperance, right? So temperance is a moral virtue, and that kind of guides us as far as our impulse, or to how many of those donuts we're going to eat. But then an intellectual virtue of prudence has to be brought in concert with the moral virtue. And what prudence does is it ultimately commands what you're going to do. Okay, so you have this temperance that controls your sensitive appetite, and then the intellectual virtue of prudence comes in, and it says you are going to only have 2 donuts, or something like that. And so it's the moral virtue and the intellectual virtue work together like that, which is kind of cool because it shows the two levels of your soul, the higher and the lower, working together, and each one of them really requires a particular virtue. So the last thing I'll say, Keith, as we wrap up this segment here, is that whenever we have to make a decision, there's three things that go into a decision according to St. Thomas Aquinas. It's you take counsel first, which means you take all the information that's made available to you and kind of assess it. And then the second thing is you make a judgment. And then the third thing is a command, so you counsel, judge, command. And prudence would be that last part. It's the application of right reason to the decision at the end. The first two would both be speculative, where you're contemplating truth, you're analyzing the situation, and then ultimately, boom, you come in with prudence and you make a decision. And so that's kind of a model of things that we face on a daily basis many, many times. We all have to make these decisions throughout our life. It has to do with the higher part of our soul, the intellect, and the application of these 5 intellectual virtues helps us to, have good habits and ultimately be more like God.
I feel like my mind has improved at least 10% since we've been talking about this. So thank you.
You're very welcome. That was the goal, is to improve your already very bright mind, Keith. I mean, anybody that gets up this early in the morning and performs at the high level you do, your mind is already bright. So if it got 10% better, then, kudos to that.
Well, it's great, and if you're listening out there and you want to hear more about St. Thomas Aquinas and how he can help you, make sure to tune in with Dave Palmer every single Friday afternoon on Back to the Father. That's Fridays at 1 p.m. Central on GRN Online YouTube. And a really interesting topic from last Friday, Dave, you talked about, why do only 30% of Mass-going Catholics believe in the real presence? So very great episode there. Make sure to look into it. But that is it for Morning Joy's first hour. Thanks again, Dave. We'll probably see you in the after show clubhouse, which is on the other side of the next hour. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves here because, as Dave mentioned, soon, in about 15 minutes or so, we're going to give away a Mercedes-Benz. So if you aren't going to be able to listen to the remainder of it, just keep in touch via social media. We'll make sure to post the winning name as soon as we can. So tune into that. But otherwise, if this is us parting ways, God bless and make it a joyful Tuesday. But if you're going to hang around for the next hour, we'll see you right after this break on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
This has been Morning Joy, where truth matters, hosted by Keith Downey. Take some joy with you today. Visit grnonline.com/joy to listen again, share a segment, or answer the question of the day. That's grnonline.com/joy.